Hello again. It's Saturday, 8th of April, 2023, and I think this is 281. I'm on a roll because this will be the third one that I've done in 3 nights, which either means that I have no life, actually you probably already worked that bit out, or I'm just really in the mood. When it comes to doing an episode, I tend to percolate like coffee, human coffee, but take my time, have ideas. I kind of focus on an album and I listen to it a lot, and I do a lot of reading about it, and I do a lot of thinking about it, and then I do these, which is kind of me, kind of just like sitting an exam or an oral exam, but no one's marking it, and no one ever tells me if I'm going to get a D- or a must try harder, or whether I actually pass. It's kind of weird, especially considering so few people watch this. But it is just a thing which I do now, I guess. And today, what I'm going to be talking about is the 21st studio album by Sir David Bowie, released on the 4th of October, 1999, which surprisingly is nearly 25 years ago now. The album is called Hours, although if you include Tin Machine, I think it was the 23rd studio album that he recorded. And this is I'm not going to muck about. This is my least favourite of the modern Bowie albums, actually. Certainly the albums that he recorded after 1987. So every single Bowie album recorded and released whilst he was an adult, or whilst I was an adult, more likely, this is my least favourite one. So let's get those knives out and start talking about why we don't like it. Well, actually, that's a little harsh. Maybe we shouldn't do that. But there we are. We start off a little bit earlier than that with a number of recordings made in 1998. So 1998, 25 years ago, the first year that Bowie was completely silent in terms of being a recording artist for quite a while, I think. He recorded a cover version of John Lennon's Mother and Bob Dylan's Trying to Get to Heaven. The Bob Dylan cover, I don't know quite what that was planned for, but Mother was originally planned for a year 2000 compilation Lennon tribute album. He recorded it in 1998. Didn't get a release until 2021, and got a limited release as a 7-inch with, I think, 1,959 pink vinyl copies and about 6,800 and something in regular black vinyl. This is the regular black vinyl edition. It sold out like that when it was released a couple of years ago. Still bloody madness, to be honest. By the sounds of it, the estate have stopped doing such ridiculously limited releases. So Mother is a conventional cover of the John Lennon song, and the Bob Dylan, they both sound great, but they don't sound like they fit into any part of Bowie's catalogue up to this point. They are easily the most conventional representations of any song which I think Bowie has recorded up to that point at all. All direct, straightforward, unambiguous, little in the way of mystery. There was also a third track. This was the first one to be released, in fact the only one that was released in 1998, and it is a recording with Angelo Badalamenti, who did the soundtrack to Twin Peaks. If you have the Brilliant Adventures box set, which is very good, by the way, very good indeed, you will find this on the recall discs. It is A Foggy Day in London Town, David Bowie and Angelo Badalamenti. And A Foggy Day in London Town, by the way, is when it was coming to be recorded, people were choosing guest artists. Bono suggested he might want to cover that song, but whoever it was who was coordinating the project went, David Bowie's beating you to it, and you can't really disagree with that. If David Bowie says he wants to do it, even Bono's going to go, yeah, I'll let you have that, I think. The first post-Earthling release, which was recorded and released, was a guest vocal on a Placebo single, Without You, I'm Nothing. Here is a one-track promo CD of it, on the grounds that I bloody hate Placebo, and I've never been bothered to track down the CD singles of it with the various mixes on. Apparently there's a flexi roll mix that has a more prominent Bowie vocal, but I've never heard it. But Without You, I'm Nothing it really sounds like a mid-paced, very maudlin David Bowie song with him singing basically every line of the song, with the chap Brian from Placebo also singing at the same time. So it's not really a duet as such. Ideally, there'd be a version where they took Brian's vocals off and it would just be Bowie. This apparently, I think, was engineered or produced by Tony Visconti, the first time that David and Tony Visconti had worked together for over 2 decades, apparently. And I listened to it earlier on, about 10 minutes ago. It's very good. It's not a great lost classic. You sit there and go, oh my God, I wish I'd known about it. But you listen to it and you go, oh, it's quite good. Quite good. And I suppose quite good is as good as you can get, which therefore makes it easily head and shoulders above the vast majority of the rest of Placebo's recorded activity. I'm not a fan of Placebo, but it's okay. I think the feeling is mutual. 1998 also saw a new and pretty inventive thing called the Bowie Bonds. With Bowie having his EMI deal expiring in 1997, he issued Bowie Bonds, which was effectively a securitization against his existing assets. So he forewent the publishing that he had for his albums for a period of about 10 years, from about 1998 to about 2008, in return for having a upfront cash sum. Effectively, he floated himself on the stock market, and he then used the money which he'd raised, which I think was about $55 million, to buy out the rights to his old material from his former manager. And so with that, plus the $28.5 million from the EMI deal which he signed, he then had a position where he was able to get complete control over his entire recorded body of work, and he used that money to buy his own rights. So the bonds were rated A3, which was investment grade, in 1999, but they were reduced to, I think, Baa3 in 2004, which is effectively junk and basically worthless. And that was all due to the rise of Napster, file sharing, the death of CDs, and the death of music retail. So streaming, Spotify, YouTube, etc. hadn't yet come to the fore. The music industry was in this weird position where people weren't selling records or CDs, but there wasn't anything else which had replaced it, and the concert industry hadn't quite caught up yet and become super expensive. So there was a gap in terms of revenue in the market. So the value of David Bowie's royalties in 2004 was effectively junk, because the market had no confidence that Bowie would sell enough copies of anything to make it worthwhile. Interesting, actually, but that's having lived through that as a 20-30 something at that time when it was happening in real time, really fascinating to kind of hear the machinations of it as it went on. Not that stopped him. As soon as David finished his recordings with Placebo, that one whole song, he went into a studio in Bermuda with Reeves and started working on his next studio album, the album that became Hours. And this, I think, has aged better than it was received at the time. So at the time it came out, I think David was 52, 53, maybe, something like that. Maybe 52, maybe 50. And that's the age when you start to kind of think about mortality and running out of time. Now, I had a phone call with a medical professional about a week ago, and because I'm nearing 50, and they said I'm now the right age for things to start going wrong. Oh boy, that made me feel good about myself and my body. But that's the point where you start to realise that the road ahead of you is probably shorter than the road behind, unless you're planning on living to over 100 years of age. And you just kind of realise, well, my life is halfway through, and where am I, and what am I doing, and where am I going, and how much have I got ahead of me? So Hours is an album that is absolutely saturated in the knowledge of mortality and somebody running out of time, looking back over their life and taking stock of it and trying to work out what it all means, if it means anything at all, and what's going to be happening next. It also, I think, is the title is influenced by, although I don't have the book, I have the film of the book, The Hours, which is a 2002 film. The book was published in 1998 by Michael Cunningham, which was I think a prize-winning book at the time, and is a book that is very clearly and heavily weighted around mortality and death and suicide and old age and running out of time. So it's not just about, and this is where you think about time in terms of how time is measured. And it's not necessarily about how much time you have, it's about what you do with the time. What do you do with the years, the decades, the months, the weeks, the days, the hours, the minutes and the seconds of your life? And I think that's where the title for this album comes from. It's around the passing of time, and it's kind of looking back over the time that's behind you and the time that's ahead and going, did I do the right thing? Was I the right person? What did I do at this point in my life? How did I live my life? Where did it all go wrong? Or as the song on side 2 says, what's really happening? There's a lot of lyrics in this album which very clearly address mortality, and the album is the first time where I think Bowie didn't try anything new. It was the first time where he took a step back and wanted to move to conventional, almost stately songwriting, as opposed to thinking about things in the concept of, right, so how much time is there, without thinking about what's going on in the world around him. So he wasn't doing drum and bass or anything like that. It was almost wanting to make a conscious shift into being regarded as a statesman or a spokesperson for a generation, as an elder person reporting back from the front lines of mortality and telling you what's really happening. That's where I think Hours works. Now, as I've grown into liking this album, I did not like it when it came out. It's still not my favourite Bowie album, not by a long shot, and it's easily my least favourite of his albums since Never Let Me Down in 1987. But it's not a bad album, it just didn't. Sometimes an album takes a long time to connect with you. You need to be at a certain point in your life for that album to connect to you. And when this album came out, I was 26, and the idea of listening to an album made by a 50-year-old who was looking back over his life and thinking he's running out of time seemed absurd to me. I was not interested in this record at the time, as my my ex of the time, were they ever to speak to me again, would probably say, you never ever mentioned David Bowie in 1999, and she'd probably be absolutely right to do so, to say so. I remember listening to the singles that came out from the album, Thursday's Child, Survive, Seven, and being pretty unimpressed by them, actually. This is not an amazing period. The songs aren't vibrant, the songs don't grab you by the throat and demand your attention. They're meditations. And if you were to be listening to a Bowie's greatest hits album and you got to Thursday's Child, you might sit there and go, that's a really long way from absolute beginners, let alone a really long way from Rebel Rebel or Genie or Heroes or anything like that. Bowie was looking and feeling and acting probably every one of his years at this point in his career. It's reminiscent, I think, of Hunky Dory, in so much as it's a very song-based album. The songs are very clear, they're very direct, they're very straightforward. But Bowie is meditating on age and family and control and maturity, around the index of time and how time marks whether you like it or not. No, time is an artificial construct, but it's real and it's tangible and it shows in your bones. And it's about managing that. Now, there's also, by the way, there's religious imagery here on the front. So this reflects, I think, a statue by someone called Peter, who I don't know, which is of the Virgin Mary holding the body of Jesus, and there's Bowie holding the earthling and outside version of Bowie there with the short hair and the fuzz, whereas versus to the more angelic, long-haired version of David Bowie there. It runs through all of this like a stick of rock. And the writing sessions for the album, I think, were very clear around that. So a lot of the material on this, by the way, was used in the soundtrack to a computer game called, let me pronounce it correctly, Omikron, the Nomad Soul. And when you get to the B-sides from this period, and also to the Brilliant Adventure box set, it features on the recall disc a number of Nomad Soul tracks on there, of versions of, and let me just quickly read them off the back, Thursday's Child, New Angels of Promise, The Dreamers, and there are a number of other short instrumental pieces which were written and composed for the game, which didn't turn out to be full songs, or some of the B-sides, for example, were kind of like revamped and turned into songs for it as well. So there was a lot of material which came out around about this time, probably about 10, 12 bonus songs, which for Bowie, for someone who never was really particularly too hot on B-sides, there was an awful lot of songs that were written during this period. And the main theme of Omikron, the Nomad Soul, is that when people die, is that they reincarnate. So it ties in with some of the Buddhist philosophies and some of the Buddhist ideas, which I think David felt quite attuned to at that point in his life. That's probably one of the things that drew him towards the game. And there was a number of songs that appeared in the soundtrack to the computer game. If you can watch it on YouTube, there's some in-game footage where David does some of the voices. I think Reeves appears in it as well. But what he was saying at the time is that when they were writing the songs, is that Reeves and David were working together in a studio in Bermuda, and later moved to New York City. And I think Reeves saw himself as being pretty much the arbiter, the person who was able to read the tea leaves and point out what's really happening here. And he said that he wasn't afraid to speak out. He wasn't afraid to say no. He wasn't afraid to point out that, are you sure this is a good idea? Do you really want to do this? This one's quite dull. And I think at one point he also said, because this was the last studio album that he recorded with David, he said that he was starting to think of David as being the singer in his band, which when it's David Bowie is probably not the right way to think about it. Another quote which I heard, which I can't attest to being true or not, is that I think Reeves said at some point is that he thought David was in danger of becoming boring. And that is kind of how I feel about ours. It's a very mature, considered album. It's not exciting. It's thoughtful. It's a Sunday afternoon of a record. It's definitely not a Saturday night of an album at all. And as I think David said at the time, I was running out of ideas. Well, Reeves said I was running out of ideas for him. I'm sure you've got to the point where you've done one thing for too long and you start to lose respect for what you do and the passion for what you do. And I think that's where this album is. It's a move away from experimentation. It's straightforward, conventional, linear songwriting. Demos were mostly done on guitar. And what they do is it kind of like it crushes the invention that goes in there. So there we have it. Track one. Okay, let's go track by track through the album and we'll pick up a couple of other things as we go along. Track one is Thursday's Child, first single released from the album. And at this point, I should open up your gatefold here, because that's a little bit more exciting, I think, than just a shot of the front cover. Thursday's Child takes its name from the autobiography of Eartha Kitt, by the way. And it is, I don't think Bowie was Thursday's Child. I think he was born on a Wednesday. I'm sure somebody somewhere will correct me if I'm wrong. But it's taking its name from an Eartha Kitt autobiography. It's kind of a way of saying I'm taking stock of what's happening in my world and what's going on through there. And then there's also that cliche which I've heard, which is that when you're a writer, if you start to write about the days of the week, you start to run out of ideas. Let me quickly go to the lyric booklet that's in this, which is in the outer of the gatefolds here, and all of the songs very, very clearly address mortality and what is happening in there. So even Thursday's Child opens with the lyrics, all of my life I've tried so hard, doing my best with what I had, and nothing much happened all the same, and then it's all about I don't regret that I was Thursday's Child. And it's all looking back. It's not talking about now. It's all talking about looking back over what's happened at various points in his life and the battles that we fought and lost upon the way, which was, I think, 50 is an age. And this is where Bowie was turning 50. 50 is an age where you kind of think it's an age where you kind of think, right, this is me. I'm an adult. I've arrived. There's no point of going, well, I'm still an adolescent. Oh, no. By the age of 50, you are who you are. That's your life. You've made some decisions. You can't go back on those decisions. You can't revisit those decisions. You can't turn around and go, no, I was just mucking about. You know, I'm somebody completely different. That's not where you are when you're that age. You are who you are, and that is that. You know, and then you kind of look at it and you kind of go, right. So if that's who I am, and that's who I've got to be, then that's who I'm going to say I am. And you have to, you know, own who you are at that point in your life. You can't pretend that you aren't, because you've had 5 decades of being able to choose who you were and what you were going to do. So yeah, there you go. That's Thursday's Child. The single has a rock mix, by the way, and if you want all the B-sides from this period, not just the ones that are on Brilliant Adventure, you do have to pick up a copy of the silver box there, which has the 2 CD editions of Outside, Earthling, Hours, Heathen and Reality on a 10-disc set. There are some tracks on the 2-disc version of this which aren't on the other version. For example, I'm just going to quickly pick it out. So some of the remixes of Seven, some of the remixes of Thursday's Child. There's a rock mix of Thursday's Child, which is not very rocky. There's a couple of mixes of Survive on here. There's a few mixes of Seven and the Pretty Things Are Going to Hell that are on here as well. But it was a very busy period, and sometimes you could argue there are so many mixes of some of the singles during this period is because Bowie maybe didn't necessarily have full confidence in everything he was doing, that it was going to be the right mix. And sometimes you've got decision paralysis, you've got too many ideas, too many decisions, too many what ifs, too many, well, I could do this, I could do that. And there are some tracks, most specifically Seven, where it feels like there isn't actually a definitive version of the song, in the same way that there isn't necessarily a definitive version of Kraftwerk's Tour de France from 1983. It always feels like there's lots and lots of alternate mixes of that track that are floating around. And this is me putting together all of the live albums and all the extra CDs which I'm going to be bringing up from this period very, very shortly and getting them ready so they're easily on hand. Track 2 is Something in the Air, and Something in the Air does appear in a remixed form on the soundtrack to the less than I think to American Psycho, the Christian Bale movie, which by the way I think is really, really good, but because American Psycho was so controversial as a book, everything that went with it has kind of been touched a little bit with that air. I think it's been overlooked, and in fact I might go and watch that again sometime because I think it's a very good film, but it's been overlooked by history. Something in the Air, second track on the album, has it kind of follows on from it picks up some of the themes that are in All the Young Dudes, some of the themes that are in 7 Years in Tibet. It's Bowie talking about how he wants to love, but he's not sure if he can. There's a lyric in here about I've danced with you too long, and there's something in the air and there's something in my eye, for example, is one of the lyrics that goes with it. And that picks up also themes that are in Let's Dance and Under Pressure, and it also lifts the melody line, by the way, from the Motel, which is on Outside as well. But what it is it's a song about multiple regrets. It's about could I, would I, should I, what should I have done, how should I have done it, where should I have gone with my life, which of course is also a theme that's picked up on the track 4 of the album, If I'm Dreaming My Life. Track 3 is Survive. It was the second single to be released from the album. I don't have the CD single, so instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the Survive panel from the CD booklet here, and it's quite good, but it's, again, there's nothing about it that really grabs me. As I'm getting older, I realise, yeah, it's a really good album, but it's an album for old knackered people who probably listen to Coldplay and think that they're younger and more exciting. It's Bowie at the age of 52, looking back and asking, did I take the right path? It's got a straightforward song structure. It's about reviewing an extinct relationship, much like Something in the Air. It's looking back and picking over things that used to happen and asking questions, big lines. So I listened to it the other day and it really reminded me of somebody I'm not in a relationship with. There was a line about, you're the mistake I never made. And the ending line of the first 2 verses is, I miss you, and there's a line about God give me wings, give me space, give me money for a change of face. And then there were these lines at the end of the second verse, those noisy rooms and pants, I miss you. And it's kind of like, yeah, man, we've all been there, haven't we? We've all had that question of going, what if things had worked out slightly differently? What if the stars had aligned in a slightly different way? What if the circumstances in life had landed slightly differently and you could have followed that path with that person, as opposed to having an adventure with that person for a few years or a few months or a few hours or whatever it was, and then to go, that was it. That was all that there could have been in that. And that's the line where that song is starting to address. There's also a line in the third verse or the fourth verse where he says, you and me and nothing more, you're the great mistake I never made. I never lied to you. I hated when you lied. And I'll survive. And you kind of go, oh yeah, so actually if you had grown old with that person, or if you had spent longer with that person, the relationship had gone further, it would have been the great mistake, wouldn't it? So you kind of also see the warning signs, and you kind of go, that you're the great mistake I never made. And everyone has somebody in their life, unless, you know, you married the first person that you kissed, if you kissed anybody, you know, and you would have had a question of, well, what if? And this never came to be, and everything that goes with it. And Survive is that song around, it's kind of like Bowie's I Will Survive, but it's not particularly, it doesn't have that sense of defiance in survival. It has that sense of resignation, is that, well, actually, you know, it's not going to kill me, it's just going to feel like it might kill me for a while. And then we have track 4, If I'm Dreaming My Life, one of the longest songs Bowie ever recorded. I think it's 7.5 minutes, If I'm Dreaming My Life. And this one is around, it's got 4 verses and then a load of solos, not really got a chorus actually. And it also harks back to All the Young Dudes, because it repeats in the guitar motif of 3 minutes 50 seconds, repeats the main motifs that are in all the Young Dudes. So it's consciously calling back to a past that's gone, but it's about the unreliability of memory. It's about when you have dreams and people in your dreams from your past come back, and you kind of go, is that real? Is the version of them that exists in the dream a version of them that died many, many years ago and no longer exists? And you think about people that you've been in a relationship, or people that you've known, and you get to a point in your life and suddenly you kind of go, right, so I only knew that person up to the age of 22 or 25 or 41. And everything that happens after that, I have no idea who they are, you know? And there are people who knew me up to the age of 27, 26 or 22, and they know their version of me, the version of me that turns up in their dreams, is the version that's got full hair on his head and no beard. There's a version of them that hasn't, the version of me that exists in their minds hasn't been through all the experiences I've been through in the past 25 years or so. I'm nicer now, I think. I'm more thoughtful and more considerate. I was young and stupid when I was young and stupid, like lots of people are young and stupid. And of course, the more you learn from the mistakes you make, the smarter you are, and therefore I'm now the smartest man on the planet. Sorry, Brian Cox, it's true. Yeah, so the version of me that they know doesn't exist anymore. Hasn't existed for a very long time, but still exists somewhere, even if it's only in their imagination. So, track 5, 7, third single release from the album. This was released on the 17th of July, 2020, not 2020, 17th of July, the year 2007. On a number of formats, this CD single includes the Beck remix and the demo. And this 7 is probably the track that's got the biggest number of Bowie mixes on of anything I can really think of. So there is the Omikron mix, there's the demo mix, there's the Beck mix, I think there's a Marcus de Vries mix as well, and there's no real definitive version of 7. in the body of work. There's so many different alternate takes of Seven, as you can pick whichever one that you like, and some of them are better than others. It's again another sad mid-pace song. It's all really bloody gloomy songs. Very similar, by the way, to what The Cure were doing at the same time with Blood Flowers. Is that lyric about where he's sitting there and says, I forgot what my father said, I forgot what my brother said, the gods forgot they made me, so I forget them too. I listen to their shadows and play amongst their graves, and I've got 7 days to live my life and 7 ways to die. And firstly, that ties in with, or is reminiscent of 7 years in Tibet. It's reminiscent of a number of the other songs that are in Bowie's body of work. Also, I think, let's not forget, Tin Machine covered Debaser, and there's the line about "In Monkey Goes to Heaven" by Pixies, whereas if the devil is 6, then God is 7. That surely cannot have escaped Bowie's attention at the time. So there's talking around, following the path in a godly fashion, or doing what is ethical and right, as opposed to what is perhaps devilish and evil. It all kind of ties together. So there's a lot of thought that's going into this album. It's just not very compelling, I'm afraid to say. Almost as uncompelling as What's Really Happening, track 6, which is a co-write with a chap called Alex Grant, who's disappeared off the face of the internet, who contributed the third verse to the song. And some famous people added a third verse, because there was a competition on Bowie.net where you got to ring the third verse, or you got to write the third verse of the song, and then you got to do some backing vocals and spend a day in the studio, and I think you got a $15,000 publishing contract. But I don't remember the third verse at all. All the clouds are made of glass, and they're slowly sinking, falling like the shattered past. Were we built to last? What's really happening? Well, okay. That wouldn't be the one I would pick. But there you are. Presumably a few quid in that chap's bank account. Next we have The Pretty Things Are Going to Hell. And not a coincidence, this is a callback in terms of its title to the great track by the Stooges from Raw Power, Your Pretty Face Is Going to Hell. It is not a coincidence at all. And of course there's a 60s band called The Pretty Things. So there's all these callbacks to the past, which Bowie is very, very clearly aware of. This was a second single in Japan and Australia. It also ties in and reminds you of pin-ups, because there's a callback to the bands from that period, and Tin Machine as well. It wasn't a single, although it was obviously in Australia and Japan. Bowie spent 28k on a video that was going to feature marionettes. These marionettes later appeared in the video for Where Are We Now. Never one to waste an investment or some time. Two puppets commissioned by Jim Henson of David Bowie that I think it's Love Is Lost they appear in, actually, the video. But they were filed away and reused at a later date. And there is 2 mixes of The Pretty Things Are Going to Hell, which are on the 2 CD version here. So there is I think if I just quickly get this correctly, there is a Stigmata film only version. So there's a remix that only appears in the film and on this reissue, and then there is the Stigmata film version, which appears on the soundtrack to the film Stigmata, which I have not seen and is probably absolutely atrocious, and in the vein of End of Days, which also is not that great. End of Days, by the way, does have one of the best lines in any movie, which is, between faith and the Glock, I choose the Glock. Thanks, Arnold, for that. A fantastic line. That is one of your top 10, up there with Who Is Your Daddy and What Does He Do? So we have track 8, which is New Angels of Promise. It's a revisit of material or themes which were originally addressed in Low and Heroes and Lodger. It's got that same kind of feel to it as that type of stuff. It's there's a revisit or a remix on the Omikron soundtrack. It's unamazing, but it's perfectly suitable as track 8. And then we have Brilliant Adventure itself, which is track 10. I think. Yeah, track 10 is Brilliant Adventure, a 2-minute instrumental, which actually really, really reminds me of the track Crystal Japan in its use of melody and chords and arrangements. Very, very clearly also designed to fit in onto the soundtrack. At this point in his career, I wouldn't have expected him to put a 2-minute instrumental on his albums. Although he did do an instrumental album in 2001, which I will talk about when I get to the next episode. And then the last track on the album is The Dreamers, which was originally a working title for the album. The Dreamers is a really interesting concept as a song. The idea is that if you are part of a couple or if you're part of a relationship, there are two of you and you together are dreamers, and you dream the same dream and you share the same skies and you sleep under the same stars. Although it's got lovers together as dreamers, moving forward through history and time, creating their own mythology, creating their own dreams, and realizing those dreams in the context of what the world can provide to you. It's one of the most romantic, I think, of the songs that Bowie ever issued. It's also, I think, perhaps a strange place to end the album, but it does feel appropriate and correct to end it there. There is no other song upon which the album could, would, or should finish. I think it's fair to say, there's lyrics in here around "So it goes, just to search a lonely soul, the last of the dreamers," and the idea that people are, moving together in a common purpose to achieve a common aim is very much kind of where the album concludes. Ours is, I think it's a better album than I give it credit for. The more I talk about it, the more I like it. But the more I talk about it, the more I like the lyrical concepts behind the album as opposed to the album itself. Musically, it's very one-dimensional. It's very slow. It's very flat. It's very unadventurous. It's not a classic Bowie LP. It really needs a little bit more oomph in the engine to make it more exciting, I think it's fair to say. But it's not his best one. But there was an awful lot of material at this point that Bowie could choose from. There was lots and lots of B-sides, lots of extra material. So if we go for, and we're going to do it because hey, we can, the 2 CD version here is the one that has the most tracks on it. Has a total of 17 extra songs, including 4 B-sides: 1917, We Shall Go to Town, We All Go Through, and No One Calls, alongside lots of alternate versions of the songs on the album. So you can make a really compelling kind of alternate take of the album using the alternate versions of Thursday's Child, Survive, Something in the Air, 7, The Pretty Things Are Going to Hell, New Angels and Promise, and The Dreamers. So there's a lot to be made out of that, if that's what you wanted to do. There are obviously the extra songs which were recorded at the same time, which appear on the Brilliant Adventures box set, and those are, of course, include A Foggy Day in London Town, the single Mother, Trying to Get to Heaven, and a cover version of The Who's Pictures of Lily, which is the last track on the Recall 5. Is it good, Pictures of Lily? No, it absolutely isn't. But it's the start of what was going to become the next Bowie record, which was where Bowie released an album where he did cover versions of his previous songs that he'd written with the balance and the knowledge of time, much like U2's Songs of Surrender. But that album didn't come out until 2021, so I'm going to get to that in the next episode. This period, by the way, also was certainly the best covered in terms of live albums per number of shows that were recorded at the time. So there are, I think, 5 live albums that released from this period. The first show, the VH1 Storytellers show, which was the last live appearance by the band with Reeves Gabrels, and that was for VH1 Storytellers in New York, which featured, by the way, the first performances of Life on Mars and China Girl, Rebel Rebel since 1990, the first performances of Words on a Wing since 1976, the first ones of Driving Saturday since 1974, live premieres of If I'm Dreaming My Life, Thursday's Child, possibly the first ever live performance of Can't Help Thinking About Me, 7, Survive as well. So a really unusual set list. If you were going to do a VH1 Storytellers set list for David Bowie in 1999, there is no way you'd bring back pretty much every song. I think there's only 2 songs, I Can't Read and Always Crashing in the Same Car, that had been performed live by David in the previous decade. You wouldn't pull those songs there. You'd just sit there and go, what? Wouldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. There was also Something in the Air, recorded live at the Paris LC Montmartre on the 14th of October 1990, which, considering there are only 16 shows or 15 live performances in front of a substantial audience that David gave during this period, there being 5 live albums or 4 live albums, 5 live albums from this period, is pretty amazing. Basically 1/3 of his entire live overture was released as a live concert release. Something in the Air was recorded at the Kit Kat, not the Kit Kat, the LC Montmartre in Paris, as part of the Brilliant Live Adventures box set. There was the Live at the Kit Kat Club New York 1999 release, which also came out recently, which features again a really interesting set list of a number of other songs, including Stay, Changes, The Pretty Things Are Going to Hell, and I'm Afraid of Americans. Again, that was released as the limited edition Brilliant Live Adventures release. We also got, as a 3rd CD on late 2000s Bowie at the Beeb box set, we got David Bowie live at the BBC Radio Theatre on the 27th of June 2000, the day after the performance at the Glastonbury Festival. So that was the last proper full-length live show from this period, that was released as the 4th live album. The Brilliant Adventure box set features a triple LP version of the show here, getting its first vinyl release, which features a number of songs which hadn't previously been released on that set. So, for example, I'm just going to pick out a few here. So you'll have the London Boys, I Dig Everything, Hello Space Boy, Cracked Actor, I think, I'm Afraid of Americans, All the Young Dudes. Oh dear, I've got it a little bit wrong. I've read it the wrong way around here. So a number of songs here, including Heroes and Starman, get their first release from this show on the Brilliant Adventures version in the Brilliant Adventures box set and the triple LP here. It's a really good show, by the way. It's a really good show, but it is the 4th show from this period, and it starts to repeat itself, to be blunt. There is also then the last release from this period, David Bowie live at Glastonbury 2000, which was released in 2018. I don't quite know why. I'm certainly not complaining. This is the only time that I saw David Bowie live. Glastonbury Festival, the year 2000. And it was just one of those shows. Now, as the liner notes by Caitlin Moran state, people, I think, were taking David for granted at this point. He'd been in the public eye nearly constantly every year for the past 30 years. He was just part of the air and the water, and you can rely on him just being there and being around and being available, coming up with a witticism on an interview, playing an excellent live show with a back catalogue to die for. You just took him for granted. He was always going to be there. And certainly when I saw David, and it was the only time I saw David live, I must admit I didn't relish it the way that I probably should have done. Firstly, because it was Glastonbury. I'd been standing up for 4 days. I'd barely slept. I'd consumed a considerable amount of recreational activity and liquids, and I was very tired, and I really wanted to sit down and a big fat nap because I was exhausted. And then David Bowie was standing there in front of me, and he was singing Wild is the Wind and China Girl and Changes, and he was about what felt like about 4,000 miles away. It was probably about this big, and I don't remember much of it at all. I remember the colour green, and I remember that I was staring at him from that side of the stage, but I don't remember any more of it. I absolutely don't. I wish I did, but it was 23 years ago. I can't remember everything. Even remember something is pretty impressive, actually. I don't quite know why I said that, but there we are. But that was Bowie at Glastonbury. It was broadcast on television, although there was only 50 minutes of it broadcast on television. It was heavily bootlegged, by the way. As this less than official Glastonbury Evening bootleg CD attests, which I bought a few years after the show. And this also features, by the way, this one features 2 songs recorded at the Yahoo Internet Music Awards on July the 24th, 2000, versions of Wild is the Wind and Life on Mars. But this is replicates the same stuff that's on here, but this has the DVD of the whole show. Only half of the show was broadcast on television at the time. And that means that the last song that I saw David Bowie perform live was I'm Afraid of Americans. And it was probably about midnight on a Sunday night, and it was cold, and it was windy, and it was rainy, and I was knackered, and I was wearing... Actually, the strange thing is, I probably should tell you this, if you watch Glastonbury footage and you see a guy dressed in an all-white boiler suit with a face mask and Doc Martens, pardon me, that was me, because Glastonbury's weather was notoriously terrible, and I decided what I was going to do, I was going to wear clothes that I could peel off if it got muddy and wet, and I didn't have any sentimentality about them. So effectively, I dressed like I was doing forensic cleanups at a murder site. Painters' overalls and outfits. Looked ridiculous, but I didn't care because my clothes survived. I didn't have to worry about getting wet or dirty or anything like that at all. This is the 3-disc version of Bowie at Glastonbury. This features the DVD of the show here, which I watched today, and then it features 2 CDs, which are inside this sleeve here. And for some reason, the age content rating reminding you that there is infrequent references to sex and drugs, by the way. And this is a long overdue live album. This probably should have been the one that came out in the year 2001, actually, Bowie at Glastonbury. But it came out eventually, and that is the thing that matters. This and the BBC show here were the last 2 major performances of that era. The whole 16 shows plus about 10 extra TV show appearances that was David Bowie's Hours era. This was David Bowie as a mature, thoughtful, considered person looking back over his life with the mistakes, good and bad, that had been made through it, making sense of what had happened previously, and trying to reconcile that with who he was there and then. Not my favourite Bowie period, but one that, as I get nearer and nearer to the age that he was when he recorded this, one that I get nearer and nearer to understanding and appreciating a lot more than I did as the young and stupid 26-year-old I once was. And that is where I'm going to wrap up Bowie's Hours album. So thank you for holding on for this wild ride. Well, it isn't actually, it's a pretty maudlin ride. And next time I talk about Bowie, I'll be talking about 2001 and his instrumental album and the Toy album, which didn't see a release until 20 years later. But all that is to come. So take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. Like and subscribe. And if you have any ideas about what you might want me to talk about in future Notcast episodes, as long as they're family friendly, put them in the comments. Okay? See you all soon. Ciao.